Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the CFAES Alumni Society Board to End of Season Gardening with Dr. Tim McDermott. If you have any questions for Dr. McDermott, please submit those via the chat feature below. I'm Amy Jo Bachman, and I serve as the Director of Alumni Engagement and Annual Giving for the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to share just a few housekeeping items. Of course, as I mentioned, please make sure if you have questions to submit those via the chat feature in the bottom toolbar of your screen. All microphones are muted and videos have been turned off. This session is being recorded and will be shared after today's webinar. And now I'd like to introduce a member of the CFAES Alumni Society Board, Ellen S. Zimmerman.
Thank you, Amy Jo. Before I introduce Dr. McDermott, do we want to play the video?
Inside each of us lies an astonishing power. A power so elemental, so vital, the world depends on it, thrives on it. That power is human potential. The ability to create vibrant futures. It's a student's potential to become a leader, an inventor, a healer. The researcher's potential to cure cancer, to forge new discoveries, to create a sustainable world. It's her potential to reduce hunger, his determination to build a stronger workforce, and their power to lift the human spirit and make it soar. When we invest in people, we invest in the belief that, together, we can change lives and move communities forward. Ohio State has always championed people and their potential. Here, brilliance and compassion intertwine. Hearts and minds connect to create lasting, positive change. With courage and optimism, we confront the complexities of today and the unknowns of tomorrow. Through time and change, we continually advocate for those who improve our world. Whiteboards and computers, they don't transform students into leaders. The people who use them do. Buildings of metal and glass don't make dynamic discoveries. The people inside of them do. Paths of brick and stone don't build stronger communities. The people who travel them do. You do. We do. Human potential is the world's greatest resource. And when we work together to champion this potential, anything is possible. Together, we are champions for students, researchers, artists, visionaries, and communities. Together, we are champions for all. And together, we move forward.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences Alumni Society Board to End of Season Gardening with Dr. Tim McDermott. I'm Ellen S. Zimmerman, and I serve on the CFAES Alumni Society Board of the Directors as the Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership Department Representative and the Fellowship Committee Chair. The CFAES Alumni Society Board represents the voice of all CFAES alumni and serves as a resource for relations between the college alumni and the University Alumni Association. The Fellowship Committee works to bring engaging events such as this webinar series to the larger CFAES Alumni Society. I am thrilled to introduce an outstanding OSU alumnus and the speaker of our webinar today. Dr. Timothy McDermott has been an agriculture and natural resources extension educator within the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences for the past 4 years after 20 years in private practice, veterinarian medicine, and surgery. He assists client, resident backyard growers, community gardeners, teacher educators, and urban farmers increase their production of fresh, local produce through his work and local food production systems in Franklin County. He utilizes his veterinarian expertise for extension work in backyard poultry, small ruminant, insect, vectored disease, and companion animal programming to client residents. The Department of Veterinary Preventative Medicine and 4-H Student Livestock Project Education. He is a proud member of Buckeye Nation as a 96 grad of the U.S. College of Veterinary Medicine. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. McDermott.
Thanks, Ellen. As an alumnus and donor to CFAES, it is a pleasure to be here. So I want to welcome everyone to this second session in our gardening series, where today we are going to focus on end of season gardening. And I need to update my bio because my 5-year anniversary with extension was in the time period between last class and this class. So we're going to talk about end of season, but are we really, last class we talked about fall garden planting. So we want to make sure that we do all of the stuff that we need to do, given the fact that we're in a really great growth period right now in your garden. We have nice weather. I've had 2 1-inch plus rainfalls in the last week. What the heck's up with that? We have lots of sun, but we are progressing now past that summer growing season into the fall season. And for me, that's great. I love fall season. Like I told you guys last time, fall is my favorite time to grow. But make sure that you are getting out there and you are harvesting, because you still hopefully have lots of produce that is ready to go. And the more you harvest, especially with the veg that is going to continue production for a while, you're going to keep getting production, right? Because these plants are trying to set seed, and if you keep them harvest, they have to keep trying to set seed. And then check your other produce to make sure it's ready, right? So here's some butternuts, and I've had a great year for butternuts. The deer ate all my butternuts last year, so I'm pretty excited about this year. I've been going down there and checking them, a little paranoid the deer are going to eat them again, trying to find when they're ready so I can get them out of my garden and I can get them up to my house. And just like we talked about last class, we still have time windows to plant. You can get some more stuff in the ground. So about a week or 2 ago, I called around to the Central Ohio greenhouses and nurseries, and there was a whole bunch of them that had transplants of some of the different brassicas, kales, and cabbages, and things like that. And so, probably too late to start from seed. A number of those a little bit longer maturing, either summer veg like the 2 zucchini at the bottom or the cauliflower I have on the right. But if you can find a transplant to get in the ground, you're in good shape. And you can start still a whole pile of things that you would direct seed in the ground. I haven't even started my spinach yet. Radishes, beets, carrots, green onions, lettuce, arugula, bok choy, a lot of those things. I'd plant collards now. I would plant kale now from seed. They're cold tolerant. Go right ahead and do that. And so if you have questions, go ahead and bop them up into the chat. I will pop up there periodically and address some of the questions as we go, maybe every 3, 4, 5 slides. And then we tried to reserve some time at the end. I know that we had really great questions last time, and I don't think I had a chance to address all them, but I will do my best today. And for those that submitted questions already, they have been answered, and we will share the link where those questions are hosted before the end of this hour is up. Okay, so lots of things that you can do end of season. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, I'm sick of growing. I'm sick of garden right now. Just kidding. I know you're not. You're ready to get rolling. There is a whole pile of chores that you can do this year that if you do them in the fall, it's going to make your life and your garden's life so much easier next spring. So this is an exploded view of a PDF that we have that we're going to everybody, so that you have this with all the pictures and everything on there. You can use it as kind of a reminder checklist to go through your stuff. And we're going to break down all of these little factions in our class today. So Document your garden, right? I say this in every one of my garden planning classes, and that is, I always tell myself I'm going to remember where I grew stuff and what I did and what went well and what didn't, but I never remember. So I put my phone in charge of it. My phone is my new brain. I take lots of pictures from all over my garden. I shoot a bunch of video as well. I want to make sure that I know where things are. So basically, I'm standing in about the same spot right now. This is day one. There's nobody planted. I came down with my spring veg. This is like April 1st. You can see that they've come through and rototilled it. And now we are planted. I got my raised beds laid out. And I got my mulch down in there. But make sure you do some documentation of your garden and then use that data for next year's planting and planning so that you can adjust to things you liked, things you didn't, what went well, what didn't go well. Because this year was a weird year. This was a super weird year. So here's some video that I shot, and take a look at this video. So this is my garden, and I'm walking down the pathway with my phone, and I'm taking some video, and you're looking at this like, wow, look at that. That's cold and it's wet. Barely anything's growing. The trees barely have any leaves on them whatsoever. What in the heck's going on? This is what, March, maybe April? This is mid-May. Do you guys remember what kind of weather we had in Central Ohio in mid-May? It was amazing. We had cold. We had our last freeze May 12th, and that wasn't a one-off. We had several days in a row where we had 28, 29, 30 degrees. So there was a real odd start to this. So here's a video, exact same pathway, exact same garden. This is 3 months later, right? What a difference a season makes. What happened in the meantime? Well, once it warmed up, then it got really warm. We had tremendous rain early on, but then we went into drought conditions, and we had drought across most of Ohio, either outright drought or moderately dry. We had a whole month, it seemed to me, that we had 90 degrees plus temperatures during the day, 70-degree plus temperatures at night. And what that did is it caused a lot of blossom drop for a lot of people's plants. I lost some production in my peppers and my tomatoes because they get stressed when it's that temperature and they drop their blossoms. But honestly, if you kept your garden irrigated, we had great sun days this year. We had lots of sun all day long, and this is a garden where that is poured on. So this is my garden, and you see all those big sunflowers, and we're noted for that, and you'll see pictures or people taking pictures of this all the time. Those are actually weeds. They have naturalized themselves as weeds down in my garden. My garden is actually an original Victory garden. It was established in 1945, which is pretty cool, except that we've been establishing pests, weeds, and diseases since 1945 down there, especially our 13-foot tall giant picture perfect sunflowers. So chores to do. On the left, my least favorite one, cleaning my tools. And I should probably lump things like winterizing my mower in with that. But if you clean your tools now, then they're ready to go. And they prolongs the life of the tools. And I got a picture of a garden rake and a shovel right there that are dirty, but let's lump a couple other things in there. Let's talk about like our pruners and things, right? Because your pruners are those tools that you're actually going to be interacting potentially with diseased tissue if you're pruning off, fungal disease leaves from your tomato plant. Make sure when you clean your tools that you take a stiff brush and you get rid of the organic matter off of that. And in fact, I'm going to lump my 6-packs and my pots and my trays and flats that I use for seed starting because they need cleaned and sterilized as well. You don't want to be the vector where you spread disease to your own plants from other diseased plants. So get all the organic matter off. And then I like to sterilize with a dilute bleach solution. And bleach is inactivated in the presence of organic matter. So scrape off all the organic matter. And then what I do is I get a 5-gallon bucket. I put 1 cup of bleach in it. That is actually straight off the CDC's website to sterilize. And I can dip my tools in there. I can dip my pots and my 6-packs and pruners and stuff in there. Then I lay them out on my driveway on the asphalt to dry off. So clean your tools. When you come to spring next year and you pull out all your shiny looking clean tools that have been stored and are in great shape, you will feel better about yourself. And fall is a great time to add more growing space because you already have tons of stuff to do in spring. In fall, you can take a little bit of time and you can let time work for you, especially like say you wanted to carve out a little piece of your lawn and you want to put in an extra raised bed or you want to expand your garden because you've had a great season and you're hooked on gardening now, what I recommend is use that fall downtime to get that garden prepped so that the soil is ready to go for you next year, right? You could build a raised bed. What I've done in the past is I'll take a light layer of cardboard and I'll lay it over the grass, or multi-layers of newspapers over the grass, and then I put my soil or my compost right on top of that. What that does is it basically smothers the grass and the weeds there, but it doesn't get rid of that valuable organic matter, right? Because grass is amazingly outstanding organic matter. Lots of fine roots, lots of fine leaves. And then what happens is the compost and the soil on top are going to assist keeping that cardboard and newspaper in place. They break down over time, and when you plant, the roots can go through it. I do recommend, though, you don't leave bare ground, right? We talked about that. We don't leave bare ground. We're going to talk cover crops. This would be great to do a cover crop on, or if not, shredded leaves or hay or straw on top of that, something that will protect that soil and minimize erosive loss. All right, good time to bop up in the chat. Let's see, Dr. McDermott followed your suggestion to plant end of season seeds under grow lights. All of them did well except for my lettuce seeds. Only a few germinated. What might I be doing wrong? So my thought would be that lettuce seeds, believe it or not, need light to germinate. And so if they were buried underneath the soil at the planting depth, like you would plant other seeds, if they didn't get enough light to germinate, they might not have germinated. And lettuce seed actually needs to be kept pretty humid until it germinates. So it'll germinate for 5 days. I will commonly mist mine daily, or what I'll do is I'll mist it, and I will actually put some like saran wrap or plastic wrap over that. So Stephanie asks, how long can potatoes stay in the ground before digging them up? How do you know when winter squash is ripe and ready to pick? So I am still picking or digging up potatoes that I planted back in April. And so they can be left in there for a decent length of time. They, at some point though, as we start to get really wet ground in the fall, and as we start to get cooler temperatures, they're going to be predisposed to a little bit of rot. So if all of your tops are died off, like all of my potato tops are died off, I would dig them up, let them dry. Be careful when you harvest them. You don't want to nick them with the shovel or the garden fork when you do that. And so how do you know when winter squash is ripe and ready to pick? So I'm going to use my butternuts as an example, but it's applicable to the rest of them. So you want to make sure that the rind is hard as a rock. You want to make sure that they've gotten to the color that they need to get to all the way through, right? So butternuts will ripen to that sort of light creamy tan, but you'll see little green streaks at the end. And I like to wait until all those green streaks are done, and then I evaluate that stem end and the vine that attaches to that. And when that's dying off and turning brown, I know that they're ready. So those are the things that I use, and I have already started harvesting butternuts, and I have some down there still. Hi, Lisa. In Minerva Park, we have been overrun with bean beetles. Yes, actually, I squished bean beetles off of my beans, and they are still eating holes in my beans. So I'm going to lump bean beetles in with cucumber beetles and flea beetles and most of those other beetles. They should start hopefully moving to their overwintered hiding places under organic matter and hopefully leave your plants alone. You can apply pesticide if you want to, and there's a bunch of them that are labeled for bean beetles, although they're pretty tough critters. Just make sure that if you're planted, say, a new batch of beans, like mine are new, they're getting ready to come into flower, and so my only option right now is to handpick and squish them, waiting for them to go away on their own. Stephanie asks, what can I do to stop bugs from eating my kale leaves without using harsh chemicals? So Stephanie, we have a couple things. There is a product that I'm typing 2 products in right now that you can use that are labeled. Oop, it went private to Amy Jo. All right, we're going to share that with everybody besides Amy Jo. Spinosad is an active ingredient that is organic, and neem oil also does pretty good depending on what critter it is. Most of what you have that would be eating kale right now is going to be a caterpillar larvae, probably a cabbage white, although there's a couple other ones there. And those products, there's actually several good products that are organic and labeled very well to get the bugs that are eating kale. And I like to use those products that are labeled that way. Make sure to read, understand, and follow the label on all of your any kind of pesticide products. so that you know what your withdrawal time is. Okay, Gail says, is there any type of lumber you would not recommend for raised beds? 100%, I would not recommend any kind of particle board or anything like that that is lumber that has been created with chemicals. I wouldn't use any kind of railroad ties or anything like that. They're creosote treated. There's, you know, a lot of folks have hesitancy using treated lumber, and we have different treatments now in the boards. And if you're going to use treated, I would line it with some plastic or something so you don't have any leaching of that treatment in there. I'll be honest, my favorite types would be cedar if you can get it, although it's pricey. You can special order that from just about any big box store. And quite honestly, I have no problem using a untreated lumber to create my raised beds. You know, a 2x6, 4x4, it's untreated, but you'd be surprised at how long those last before we break down. Aaron says, can we plant fruit trees in fall or early winter? Yes, you can. We're coming into a good time window to do a lot of different plantings, grass and trees and some bare root perennials or even potted perennials. We're getting close to doing that, right? They might not look really good, but you don't want them to necessarily leaf out. You want them to get root growth. And so planting them now allows them to grow roots and then make sure you keep them watered, make sure you plant them to the correct depth. Extension has great fact sheets on planting depth for fruit trees. All right, Stephanie, how and when do I start up young strawberry plants from older plants that no longer bear fruit? So you should have those runners right now. If you have runners off your young strawberry plants, you can either just sort of clip them off the runner and plant them right now, or you can put them in pots, let them grow roots and transplant them. But you should have that happening right now with your strawberries. Cold tolerant planting okay in Northeast Ohio snow belt now too? You bet, why not? You might have to do season extension, Terry. My folks live up in Youngtown area. You can grow. You just need to do a little extra protection because you guys are blessed, blessed by snow up that way. All right, Nina says, I have a mix of perennial and annual herbs. The oregano is huge and the bees love it if I let it go to flower. Can I cut that to the ground or size it down somehow? Here's what I recommend with the perennial like oregano. Perennials are spending their time right now putting energy from the sun through their leaves down into the roots to grow a nice giant root ball so that they can overwinter. So I would not chop your perennials right now. If you want to harvest some so you can dry it, that would be one thing, but it is a great pollinator. Most herbs are great pollinator flowers, and so I would probably wait until you know it's like dead in the winter and that growth is, you know, totally dead and brown, and then you can remove that sort of sticks that is left on a oregano plant, but make sure you give it the time so it can create the energy it needs. I would like to plant grapes for the first time in spring. What can I do now to prep the soil? I would probably think about getting a soil test for grapes and add some organic matter in and do some research. We have great fact sheets on Ohio Line. I'm going to type that in right now. If you guys are unfamiliar with Ohio Line, that is extensions. It's all one word. It's not a misspell. It is all one word. Go on Google and search Ohio Line. And what that is the online compendium of all of our fact sheets. And we have killer ones for grapes. Okay. Oh, we got a lot of butternut questions here. How long can you store butternut squash? I have stored butternut squash and eaten my last one in June of the following year. Make sure that you don't nick it. Make sure that you eat the ones that have any blemishes first. When you harvest butternut squash, because I see we have a couple more questions on there. I like to sort of let them cure. I leave them alone, basically. They're not quite like sweet potatoes that you got to cure them. I leave my butternut squash alone in a single layer, not touching for months, because unlike almost every other vegetable, when you harvest your winter squash, they need to develop their sugars. And if you harvested one and you tasted it now, you're like, oh, that's gross. Is the basement a good place to store butternuts? That's where I store mine, yes. And Jean writes, my butternut vines are dying, but the squash still has some green streaks. Do I just go ahead and pick them? Why don't you give them a few more days, Jean? What I tell folks also is if you can get the squash up off the bare soil, mine are mature on either hay or plasticulture because I don't want to have sort of that where the soil contacts it, because if you get a little rot in that spot, that messes with your storage time. My white eggplants are going in green right now. Is the plant dying? I guess, Regina, I would assess the plant vigor more by how healthy the leaves are. And as to why, white is turning into green now? That's a good question. I have never heard about that. But white eggplants are the original eggplants. That's why they're called eggplants. All right, actually, Maureen, you are jumping the gun because we are going to be talking about step-by-step guides to make the PVC hoop row in our next class. So save the date for 10/8. Okay, we use chemicals to kill weeds on a patch for next year's. It's safe to plant there next spring. Hi, Nora. Nora's one of my colleagues at OSU Franklin. Nora, read the label and it should tell you the exact withdrawal time before you can use that soil for other things. All right, so I mentioned overwinter spinach. Maureen was asking about it. This is one of my favorite things that I like to do. We're going to have our next class in winter gardening, which means how do we overwinter plant, as well as maybe grow a little bit of inside stuff. So next thing on the list, clean up your debris, because next year's harvest is this year's management. Last year's management is this year's harvest, right? Here's two pictures. This is a picture of one of my longest friends in Grandview's garden, and he grows the tomatoes in the exact same place year after year. He doesn't put any mulch down. He uses the same exact stakes year after year, and every year his tomatoes die from fungal blight. This is fungal blight. This is, these probably, you know, this area is just disease. Every year that debris is there. So if you have any diseased tissue, that's not compost, that is the trash. And then here's another picture that I took like a week ago of a plot that's in my garden, and I talked about the weed burden in my garden. It's just absolutely tremendous. This is a full plot, 30 by 40 going to seed, and there is pigweed in here. There's lamb's quarters. You can see foxtail. We got morning glory. This is a whole patch of thistles over here. Conservative estimate by me that there's probably 10 million seeds in here, and the pigweed and lamb's quarter seeds have a seed viability in the soil of 29 years. Don't let your weeds go to seed if you can help it. Don't put them in the compost either. Get these chopped up. You don't want to put 10 million seeds into your garden. There's a reason that this plot looks like this year after year. It's because it's allowed to go to weed seed year after year. So, seed start station. Think about building one. Although, you know, back in the day when I used to do this, I used to build one. This is shop lights with daylight bulbs in 2x4s on a table in my office. Nowadays, you can buy prefabbed LED light kits that are fairly inexpensive, the exact same cost as it takes to build this unit right here. You can hang them up and you can grow under them with a timer. LEDs have come down in price, and you know, seed starting is one of the greatest tools in the toolbox of a grower. Once you master that, you will be shocked at how awesome your garden is going to look, because you get to grow everything in the catalog when you can do that. Build a compost pile. I'm a compost enthusiast. I have a compost pile, and mine is about empty right now because I've been using it. But thankfully, Mother Nature is about ready to drop organic matter all over my yard. And so once those leaves start coming, what I will do is I will take the last little bit of compost that I have out. I will start piling up the leaves in my compost pile, and I will sprinkle that formed compost in there, sort of like a starter, like a yeast for a loaf of bread. And that will get me some new compost next year. So build a compost pile. Leaves are wonderful organic matter. They are a gift. Leaves have more nutrients per pound in them than more. Think of trees as nature's ultimate cover crops, and leaves are the harvest from that. If you want a super easy compost pile, you can go to any big box store, Lowe's or Home Depot or hardware, whatever, and you can get rabbit fence. This is rabbit fence. Rabbit fence has really tiny spaced holes at the bottom so rabbits can't get through, and then bigger holes at the top. It's about 3 foot tall. They come in rolls of 25, 50, or 100 feet. Get a 25-foot roll, and then unroll it, measure to the middle, so you have two lengths that are 12.5 feet long, and then make a circle out of them and join that together with like zip ties or twisty ties. That is a perfect compost pile. It allows lots of air to move in through that, and if you ever want to turn it, you unhook your twisty ties, you unhook that ring, you put it back together right next to that pile, and you just fork the old pile into the new ring, and that will speed up your compost process. So this is Dr. McDee's fabulously easy compost pile. And I did this for years before I built my new one. All right. Any idea why my cantaloupes never got past a softball size? I guess it would depend on variety. There actually are some varieties where they will be baby cantaloupes, and potentially that could have been the way that that variety was. But I guess my other thought would be that, you know, when they're really in a fast growth phase and they're growing, 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 that is when we had serious heat and serious drought, and cantaloupes are just big balls of water and they need constant irrigation. All of those large sort of cucurbits, gourds and pumpkins and melons, they all need tons of water. Any ideas for using old windows to make a cold frame to put my garden for winter gardening? Heck yeah, I love cold frame. You know what I used to do with mine, Stephanie, as I would make, I mean, you could make a 2x4 and you could put a hinge on your window and you could hinge that down. I'm a big fan. So for those who are listening, cold frames are basically like I don't want to say a mini greenhouse, but they kind of are like a little mini greenhouse. It's a great place that you can put your transplants if you want to get some size on them outside, or you can put that over a bed so that you can do season extension. I have used straw bales and just set windows on top of it. I've also used like 2x4s and built a box. Next question, Maureen says, would you put your rabbit wire compost up on a platform to get air under, or better not to? You can. You know, you could also make this compost pile in your garden, and then you could just spread it and right out if it was right in place. I used to have mine on a poured concrete 4x4 foundation so that I didn't lose a lot of compost down into the soil, because I had mine under a tree. And if you build a compost pile underneath a tree or even close to a tree, the tree roots will grow up and into your compost pile. And when you think you have compost, all you have is a root ball when you start digging in it. Bonnie asks, how do you preserve perennials in a window box over the winter? You know, Bonnie, it really depends on the perennial. They need to be super cold tolerant. You could put something in there. You could, you know, you could put something inside, I guess, if you had that. But it really depends on the perennial. And so I would, you know, take a look at what you have and do research on the specific varieties, because there's just a wide variety. Okay, my cold frame with a spare storm window picked up a gust of wind and shattered the window. Yes, be cautious. Good advice, Shannon, thanks. My internet cut out. I'm sorry if I missed this. When cleaning up old plants, do you pull plants out of the ground, root and all, after harvesting if all is done? Lori, maybe. Honestly, that's sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Meaning, like if I was harvesting like my bush beans at the end of the season, I just weed whack them down and leave the roots in place, because they have a the nodules where they fix legumes on there. And so as long as you're going to use that, remember, roots are organic matter too, and weeds are organic matter. I don't necessarily pull all my weeds and pitch them. I might weed whack them, as long as they're not diseased or gone to seed, especially annuals, not necessarily the perennial ones. I like to make sure that I'm saving as much organic matter as I can. And Ellie asks, can vinca be an acceptable ground cover? Sure, you know, in the proper thing, vinca is a ground cover that you could use under a tree, maybe in a shady area. That would be something that could be decorative. All right, how are we doing on time? You guys are just rocking the questions today. Outstanding. FAES is bringing it. So here is why we compost, right? That state up north came out with a study. It's probably wrong knowing them, but for every 1%, you can increase your soil organic matter, SOM. You get a 12% increase in crop yields, and that is an outstanding percentage amount. And I will say this, it is difficult to move your organic matter. And in fact, if I am pushing the needle and I'm trying to build as fast as I can, if I even got a 0.5% up in a year, I would be ecstatic. So this is a time thing. You want to always be building your organic matter, and you want to be minimizing your loss of organic matter. But that's another point in the favor of a compost pile. So soil test. Soil tests are the best $12 that you will ever spend for your garden. What a soil test is you harvest a soil sample from the root zone of whatever sort of area you want to sample. This could be your vegetable garden, like we're talking veg today, but it could be your orchard, it could be your cornfield, it could be your lawn. We commonly do these for lawns. And what you do is you harvest that sample, you send it to a lab, and there's lots of different labs. I got a couple of different examples right here. And you get a report back that tells you your pH, it tells you about a bunch of different macro and micronutrients, and then it gives you a guideline on how much fertilizer you need to add for your targeted crop. And that's very important, right? When we talk about agriculture and we talk about growing vegetables, that's not Mother Nature, that's agriculture. We need to make sure we are matching the fertility to what we want to grow, or else it won't do well because it's not from here generally. So if we look at the blue bars right in the middle on this soil test, I harvested this soil sample from a community garden on the east side of Columbus in the Shepherd neighborhood. And if you would have looked at that soil, you would have thought that it would have grown anything, right? State fair level veg. But when we got the test back, we noticed that there was a critical deficiency in 2 of the 3 macronutrients, phosphorus and potassium, which means that even though that soil looked great, it did not have the fertility that would allow good growth of vegetables. And you would have planted, and if you hadn't matched that fertility, you'd have had a horrible year growing veg, but you would have had an awesome year growing weeds, because weeds don't read the soil test. They don't care. They're going to grow. They're from here. They're used to nobody feeding them. So soil test, if you do it in the fall, a lot of people do it in the spring right before they plant, and that's not a bad idea. It takes longer to get your test back because everybody's doing them in the spring, but then you have a more up-to-date level. If you soil test in the fall, you might want to wait till spring to fertilize, especially if you have bare ground, unless you can cover crop or otherwise not lose that fertilizer. But if you fertilize bare ground and you leave it uncovered all winter, all that fertilizer you fertilized with is probably driven down into the subsoil. So let's talk about cover crops for a few minutes, because the submitted questions that I got had several cover crop questions on it about what to use and what they are and what do I recommend. So we touched on this in the last class, but we're going to touch on it again because we got a few new viewers here. Cover crops are a tool in your toolbox. They are either monocrop planting, or they are a mixed variety of different species of plants. These plants are usually from different agronomic crop families, cereal grains, legumes, although there's a tremendous variety of cover crops. There's well over 100 different varieties of plantings that can be used for cover crops. And a lot of folks ask me, what cover crop should I plant? And the question is, what problem do you need to address? Because not every cover crop does every single thing. They all have their couple things that they're great at. And so you take a look at your production system and you determine, what do I want to address? And you pick a cover crop that does that, and you pick a cover crop that does that in the time you're planting, right? Because there are warm season cover crops and there are cool season cover crops, and we're heading into the cool season cover crop time frame for planting, right? Do you want to get rid of weeds? There's weed smotherers. Do you want to simply make sure you have the ground covered and suck up as much nutrition as you can in that plant so that it's there next year when you rototill that in? Do you want to, attract pollinators in the summer? Those are all tools that cover crops can do, but not every cover crop does the exact same ones. So there's an easy to manage mix that I like, and you could plant one or both of these. That is the easy to manage overwintered mix of oats and Austrian winter peas. This is easy to manage because they are cold tolerant, but not cold hardy. So they're going to grow and grow and grow. But then if we have a normal winter, whatever that looks like in Ohio anymore, I have no idea. But if we have a normal winter, we get multiple days in the 20s, these forages die, but they don't sort of die and melt away. They die and do that coverage still of the soil, right? The roots are still in the ground, slowly breaking down. The organic matter residue is slowly breaking down on the top of the soil. And then in spring, when you want to plant, you can just rototill this under and it mixes in very well. And these play really well together because you have a cereal grain, which is the oats. It's basically a grass, right? Lots of fine roots grabbing lots of nutrition. Then you have a winter pea, which is a legume. It is fixing nitrogen and it is helping that grass grow. And so this is a great mix. You could also plant straight oats. You could plant straight winter peas. The ideal time, I hate to say, to plant this was probably closer to August 1st. The reason is because this is not winter hardy. You don't get any growth on the back end in the spring. So all the growth you need to get is now. But I would still plant this now. The reason is we are predicted, and I shared this last class, but we are predicted still to have a higher percentage chance than normal of warm weather into the fall. And a new piece of data came out recently that said that they are not expecting an early frost or freeze this year. They're thinking it's going to be closer to on time or maybe a little bit later. So this is the overwintered mix that's easy to manage. Here is the overwintered mix that is harder to manage. The reason is most of the growth is on the backside. This stuff is bomb-proof in the cold. This is a mix that has forage radishes, a couple of legumes, vetch and crimson, and then winter rye. You could plant individual species of these. The most common one that is planted as an individual species would be winter rye. Winter rye can be planted very late. You can plant this. I've planted this as late as Thanksgiving before. It's soil temperature dependent, right? Plants and seeds live in the soil. So winter rye is one that you could plant as an individual species when soil is like 40 degrees or even down to 38, I've read, and it will germinate. And it only needs to get a little root growth, because then what it does is just sort of sits there all winter, and then when spring hits, all of these take off like a rocket. You could plant that now, because a lot of studies have shown that the earlier you plant this, the more root growth you get, the more nutrients that these plants are holding on to release next year. What makes it harder to manage is in the spring, when this thing starts growing like a rocket, it will get 2, 3, 4 feet tall. And when it's that big, it is hard to manage. You need like a bush hog to cut this stuff down. I use a metal bladed gas powered weed whacker. And if we have super wet springs and you can't really even work in your garden without sinking up into your ankles on it, then that delays the management of this as well. But in terms of bang for your buck with organic matter and scavenging nutrients and building soil health between now and next season, you can't really beat this too much. But because it's harder to manage and because it gets really big and because it has bigger stems, it takes longer to break down in the soil. So this is not the crop that you plant before your early spring vegetables next year. Maybe the one you do before that is your easy to manage mix, right? Because this will melt away and you can have your garden ready to plant in April. This one you're chopping down in April, hoping that you can plant in May. So this is where I would cover crop before I put in my tomatoes and my peppers and my winter squash and zucchini, so I know that this is broken down all the way. Okay. I'm thinking we have a lot of cover crop questions, and I saw that chat. So let's see, we got one video, and this is my garden last week. Lots of harvest still left in there. Actually, I've yanked out that zucchini and that zucchini. They both died from bacterial wilt. This growth in the middle is my winter squash, peppers and eggplant right here. My corn was right here. You can still see it. I've yanked it out. That got a bunch of transplants, and I'm still harvesting. So I hope you are as well. All right, a couple of notes on this slide, and then I'm going to jump up. We have about 10 minutes that we can go through the chat, but if you missed the Planting the Fall Garden class on October 6th, the YouTube link has now been posted, and we will share that with you. If you attended but you want to watch it again, feel free to do so as well. We will get today's class recording posted shortly. And then make sure to save the date for October 8th, because we are going to be talking about using row cover to plant some spinach, maybe some kale, and creating a garden that you can grow over the winter where you can harvest in January, February, and March. And if you're like me, and I think y'all are, there is nothing better than eating some of your own green veg you grew yourself when it is cold outside. All right, we got 18 chat questions. Time to get in there. Okay, let me make sure that I go to the beginning so I don't miss anybody. And all right. There we go. Maria, I have limited growing space and half my plants are grown in containers. Would it be better to mulch around my plants with grass clippings, straw, or combination of other? Maria, I'm a huge fan of mulch. If you saw a picture of my container garden right now, all of my plants have mulch around them. Mulch is one of, if not the best tool in your toolbox. So yes, I would say mulch around that. And if you can't do a cover crop, if you have your containers, what I would do is I would put a thick layer of like a mulch over top of them so that you don't have that erosive loss of your stuff. Thanks for the kind words, Melinda. Weeds don't need a soil test. They don't read it. They don't care. All right, Maggie writes, if you have raised bed, would it be best to test each bed or would just one suffice? I would say, Maggie, that if you had grown and you have different production systems, that I would test them different. But if you're growing in similar patterns, I would test them and sort of mix that all together into one sample. And here's an example of that. If you're just doing crop rotation and you have several beds and each bed gets different veg every year, but over time they're pretty much getting used in a similar way, that's one sample. But if you had one raised bed that maybe was planted in asparagus and then one raised bed that was in veg, I would use that as two. All right, Stephanie writes that she used the wood pellet ash. I guess what I would do, Stephanie, is I would contact the company before and ask if that can be done that way, because we have a wood pellet stove at our family cabin and those pellets are held together with some sort of a gluish chemical. And so make sure that that chemical is something that is able to be ingested by humans. I highly recommend that. But otherwise, like if you're burning wood, hardwood, like we have a wood stove at my house, I put ashes into my compost pile because basically when we talked about trees as the ultimate cover crops and leaves are an organic matter, wood ashes off of hardwood that you burn that's clean is all of the rest of the nutrients from a tree that didn't gasify off, right? I mean, you're going to lose your sulfur, you lose your nitrogen, but the rest of it is things like calcium and magnesium and phosphorus and potassium. So contact the company, make sure that that's safe to use, okay? Are there veggies that do not like whatever nutrients in the ash? Sort of. And the reason I say that is ash is an alkalinizing agent because it has a lot of calcium in it and it drives up the pH of both, our soil when we use it or even compost a little bit, although compost is a buffer. High pH in potatoes predispose potatoes to scab. So that is one where you might find that is a problem. How thick of a layer of compost should be spread on the garden beds, Marilyn? I would spread as much as you can. I mean, I run out. If I had more, I would spread more. I would bring those beds up to as high as you can bring them with compost. Honestly, I wish I had more. All right, just to clarify, if you fertilize in the fall and just use a straw cover layer, does that mean the fertilizer value is lost? You'll probably lose some, Judith, especially the nitrogen component. And so ideally you would plant a cover crop so that you tie up all of that fertilizer in a plant that then gets released when the plant breaks down. So if you're not going to cover crop and you get that soil test, you might want to wait to spring to follow those recommendations if you can't protect your raised bed the way that you wish. And Maureen writes, would you put cover crops in a raised bed? I have done that in the past, 100%. It's all about your management, right? Cover crops can go in a raised bed system, no problem. In fact, I like using cover crops in a raised bed system because my raised beds allow me to really easily define my crop rotation and what crops are going to go where. And so I can sort of time my management of my cover crops in my raised beds to fit in the time of my planting. Can I get the overwintered mix? Lynn writes, so my favorite place to get cover crop seed, and there's a million, right? You can go online, you can get those from a million seed companies, they can be delivered to you, but seed is heavy, and we have a place here in Central Ohio, they're called Walnut Creek Seeds, and I say that, OSU Extension, we do not, we do not espouse a certain company or anything over one, but these guys are friends of Extension. They donate a tremendous amount of seeds to community gardens and places. They give classes to teach on that. And Walnut Creek Seeds is in Fairfield County. And so you can avoid your shipping if you head on down there. Okay. All right, where are we at? All right, so we have a lot of cover crop ones. Do oats or winter peas attract deer? Yes, they do. Holy moly. Cover crops can attract deer, 100%. And oats is a preferred forage for deer, and the only thing that they like better than oats is legumes. And so yes, you would attract deer. So if you have a real problem with deer and nuisance wildlife, they would come there. So yes, you can use hay to avoid weeds. I have wheat growing up sparsely through the straw I mulched with. Should I just let it grow among my tomato plants and till it under in spring? Melissa, you can do that, sure. Just don't let it go to seed. okay? And realize that depending on how thick you have a growth of a cereal grain, which is a grass, their root volume is tremendous. Lots of fine roots that are closer to the top of the soil profile, and grass growing underneath your veg can actually start taking water and nutrients from them. Do you have to mow, cut back cover crops to ensure they don't go to seed and become a weed in your garden? Yes, James, you do. For almost all of them, except that overwintered, easy to manage mix if we get a cold enough winter. If it's a mild winter, then you actually have to mow that too. So generally these crops all have a level of management that they need. And in fact, some of them are prolific seeders. And in fact, one of my favorite cover crops, buckwheat, is a weed in the knotweed family. You definitely want to make sure you don't let them go to seed, or else you have just planted weeds. And so Nancy, we talked about where to get them. Can you buy those? Winter cover crops are always planted from seed. You would need thousands of transplants. So you can, and they generally germinate really easily too. And we're in the time of year where we're getting some good moisture. Large containers, you know, Kim, I guess I would probably maybe not necessarily cover crop in containers, depending. I would probably, if I was doing that, I would do the easy to manage mix, because I can't really imagine how I would take a gas powered weed whacker to knock down the winter in my container gardens. In warm season wise, a good cover crop for container gardens would be the buckwheat I just referenced, because buckwheat's really, really easy to grow. You could plant it in your container. It breaks down instantaneously and it attracts pollinators, but it's a summer one. If you plant fall veggies, is it too late to plant an easy to manage cover crop? Bernadette, we're real close to the sort of late time for that. And so that's the problem with that easy to manage one. The earlier you plant it, the better. But you, if you're like me, and you all are, you still got some plants growing. So I will probably not put any oats or winter peas in, because every inch of my garden is planted and I don't see anything coming out anytime soon. I will put half of my garden into overwintered mix. That will be the half next year that does not get that will not get early spring stuff. All right, Rick, you're welcome. Kim says, we are thinking of interplanting buckwheat in our fall crops. Is that a good idea? Why not? It may be good. It depends on your fall crops. I guess here's the problem, Kim. Buckwheat is going to germinate and it's going to need to be mowed, and it is, and so you're going to have to get around and chop it down around your plants. And the timing of the termination of the buckwheat might not be the time where your plant is coming out. And then keep in mind that, you know, when we talk about interplanting a bunch of other plants around our veg, we don't want to starve our veg of the nutrients and the water. And really close plantings of competitive plants will do that, right? You know, you think of nature and lots of plants are growing together, but they've adapted to grow that way for a long time so that they all make use of their space. But in agriculture, everything strives against each other. And that's why we space things out and we give it fertilizer and we irrigate it. So I would be careful with that. All right. Thanks, Amy. More information. Love this webinar. Thanks, Lisa. City folks, farm shop. There you go. Shop local. If they have, give them a call. Find out if they have vetch and clover. And we always want to make sure that we are helping our local businesses. Is there a particular type of mulch that you should use? Bernadette, use whatever you can get inexpensively that works with your system. I use all types of mulch. And then I think I missed one about grass clippings. So grass clippings can be used as mulch, or it can be put in the compost as long as you don't have any weed and feed on it. Weed and feed actually will potentially have a residue in that will cause some serious problems. All right, do leaves need to be tilled in the fall? So Kaylin, what I recommend is maybe not till them in the fall, especially if you're going to use them to cover your garden, but mow them and break them up, because leaves have a skin on them like our skin, and they will actually form a mat, and that mat can prevent moisture from getting through. We have a store-bought composter that we can turn. When we put it in, it doesn't break down like compost piles that are directly on the ground. Why? They're going to break down at a different process because you're injecting oxygen into it, which is just because a compost pile is basically biochemical fire, and it simmers. The more oxygen you put in, the more, but it needs water too. And those compost tumblers don't necessarily have water. All right. I hate to say we're okay, good. We got one more question because we have time for one more question. But Barbara asks, our peach tree lost all of its leaves this spring and we had no fruit. It now has leaves. Will next year be impacted by the loss of the leaves? And so my guess, Barbara, is your peach tree got fungal disease. There is a number of diseases of peaches that will do that. And you might find that you do have the negative impact on that. I mentioned Ohio Line earlier. Ohio Line has some great links on how you can grow some of the various stone fruits and tree fruits and all kind of different fruits at home and the different applications that you might need to take care of that. Rachel, we are kind of out of time, but I will say this. I never get rid of my container garden soil if I can. If I have to, I just keep topping it off for compost and keep going. So with that, I'm going to turn back over to Ellen and Amy Jo, and I tremendously appreciate all of your questions. You guys absolutely rocked it today. I am so proud of all of you gardeners. Make sure to save the date right here, October 8th, Winter Gardening.
All right, thank you. As we wrap up the second session of the CFAES Alumni Society Board Gardening Series, I'd like to, of course, thank Dr. McDermott for speaking and sharing his time and gardening knowledge with all of us. I think I speak for all participants today that we've learned a lot from your expertise. So thank you again, Dr. McDermott. We really appreciate it. Once this webinar concludes, you will be asked to take a survey. Please provide feedback about your experience today so that we can improve future webinars. Registration is open now for the final webinar in our series, which will be on Thursday, October 8th from 12 to 1 p.m. Thanks again for joining us today and enjoy your afternoon.